He pulled her over with a smirk, certain he'd caught someone out of place. In front of a crowd, Officer Grant mocked the black woman standing beside her own car, treating her like a criminal for daring to look successful. Each word cut deeper, each laugh from the bystanders heavier, until silence became her only defense. But that silence would soon shake the whole town when they learned who she truly was, the state governor. How would you react if justice wore the face you tried to humiliate? If this moment stirs something in you, hit like and share it. Let's uncover what happened next. I remember the heat first. Morning in Monroe, Georgia, the kind that sticks to your shirt and turns every breath into work. Traffic moved lazy down, main church signs still lit from the night. A black sedan eased onto the shoulder blinkers, ticking like a quiet metronome. The woman inside, later I'd learn her name was Dr. Alana Pierce, lifted a phone to her ear. Nothing dramatic, just a driver pulling over to take a call. Then the siren tore the morning in half. Blue and red splashed across the chrome of her trunk as a cruiser slid in behind her. The door swung open, and a white officer unfolded himself into the heat like he owned it. Sunglasses. Fresh haircut. One hand resting on the holster, not gripped, but close enough to say he could. He walked the long way to her window, slow steps, chin forward, the sort of pace that says, "The clock runs for me, not you." "License and registration," he said, dry as gravel. His voice didn't sound like law to me. It sounded like suspicion dressed up in authority, the kind of tone small towns learn to live with and pretend they don't. The woman rolled the window down steady. No rush, no flinch. She opened her purse, set each document on the window edge like she was laying down cards at a kitchen table. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. Soft, clear, a voice you leaned toward to catch. "Let's find out if this car really belongs to you," he said, and the space between them changed. It got tighter, meaner. You could feel the sidewalk lean in. Two guys from the feed store stopped talking mid-sentence. A teenager on a bike coasted to the curb. I was across the street with my coffee, and I did what I always do when something doesn't sit right. I raised my phone and hit record. The screen mirrored the scene, a sunlit road, a steady woman, a uniform that somehow felt louder than the siren. The officer took the papers. He didn't thank her. He didn't explain. He flicked his eyes across them, then turned and laid them on the hood like they were nothing special, and the paint was a table. "Why did you stop me?" she asked, still calm, like she was talking to someone who could be reasoned with. He didn't blink. "You looked out of place, ma'am." Out of place. Two words, a whole history stuffed inside them. A few more people gathered. Somebody whispered, "What's she done?" A woman in scrubs murmured, "Nothing yet." A man next to me, later I'd learn his name was Ethan, shifted his weight like he was ready to step forward and trying to decide if it would help or make everything worse. The officer leaned down to the window close enough for his reflection to swallow half her face. He smiled with just one side of his mouth. "Must be nice," he said, so casual it hurt, pretending to own something like this. My chest went hot. Not angry yelling hot. The other kind. The shame kind. The kind that says, "We are all here and none of us is stopping this." She didn't look away. She didn't swallow. She didn't explain how keys or titles work, didn't offer bank statements or job titles. She simply met the mirrored lenses that refused to meet her eyes. The phone in my hand buzzed comments, starting people, asking what town, what street, what's happening. I kept filming. "Officer," she said, the way a steady nurse says, "Hold still. Is there anything else you need from me right now?" He straightened, annoyed that his line had landed and she hadn't tripped over it. He opened her driver's door with a firm pull that wasn't quite violent and wasn't quite not. "Step out of the vehicle." She stepped out. Sandals on hot asphalt. Wedding band catching a white drop of Sunday. The air went thinner. On my screen, you could see the small things, the way her hands stayed visible, fingers open, the way his shoulders squared more than they needed to. Up close, his voice had that brittle ring people get when they're sure they won't be questioned. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Downtown," she said. "For what community work?" she said. He laughed short and mean like he was spitting a seed. "You people always have a story." Ethan moved then, not lunging, just sliding half a step forward, palms visible, voice even. "Officer, she's cooperating." "Maybe." The officer snapped his gaze at him. "Back it up, sir. Unless you want to be part of this, stop." Ethan stopped. The rest of us did what crowds do. We watched and pretended watching was neutral. The woman Alana let out a breath that didn't quiver, and somehow that made the moment louder. The officer circled the car, opened the passenger door, leaned in. He wasn't searching for danger. He was searching for confirmation. He didn't find it. That made him angry. He came back to her and closed the space between them until courtesy had to step off the curb. Say something, he said, close to a hiss. Go on. She did. Not a speech, not a debate, just a sentence soft enough to require listening. You wouldn't hear it. It landed like a held note in a church. He tilted his head, tasting the insult he wanted next. Behind him, the crowd made its own weather, shifts of feet, a cough swallowed, a camera raised higher. I could hear my own breath in the mic. I could hear hers steady and slow, like she'd trained for moments where stillness was her only armor. He pointed at the hood where her papers lay. We'll see if any of this adds up, he said. Stand right there. She did. He made standing sound like surrender. She made it look like choice. A minute passed, or an hour. It's hard to tell time when you're holding your breath. A drip of sweat rolled off his jaw and hung for a second at his collar before it disappeared. A fly worried the edge of a mirror. A semi rolled through the far light and blew a tired blast that didn't change anything. Then he tried again, searching for where to put the knife. What do you do, he asked, like a prosecutor who already disliked the answer. Community service, she said. Same tone as before. No upgrades, no explanations. He smirked. Sure. And I'm the mayor. Someone behind me chuckled and then looked down at their shoes as if the laugh had escaped by mistake. The heat pressed harder. I could feel a headache starting at the base of my skull. He stepped back half a pace and angled his body so the badge was the first thing you saw. Let's make this simple, he said. Hands where I can see them. Her hands were already there. Maybe it was that a quiet refusal to be rattled that made what came next feel inevitable. He'd thrown every little spark he had and still hadn't seen her flinch. Some men read calm as challenge. He shifted his weight forward again. You think you're better than the rest of us, she didn't answer. On my screen, her face was composed, not cold. A teacher's face when a student is testing the wrong lesson. A mother's face when the child is old enough to know better. It wasn't superiority. It was certainty. Across the street, the church sign blinked, all are welcome. The words felt like they'd wandered into the wrong scene. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then gave up. A diesel engine coughed. The officer lifted the papers again, held them like they'd done something to him, and put them back down harder than before. The crowd bent closer without moving. She met his stare, steady as shade. And in that silence, the story began. He wasn't searching for evidence, he was searching for control. Officer Grant leaned into the black sedan, rifling through papers and compartments, like a man proving a point to himself. When he straightened, he held her wallet between two fingers, flipped it open, then tossed it onto the hood with a careless flick. The sound it made, soft leather hitting metal, cut through the heat like a slap. People nearby looked up. A barista from the corner cafe stepped outside, wiping his hands on an apron. A woman pushing a stroller slowed to watch. And then Ethan Cole, a middle-aged local with a voice that carried decency, stepped forward. She hasn't done anything wrong, he said, calm but firm. Grant turned jaw, set tight. Back off, sir. This is a routine check. But even the air didn't believe him. Routine checks didn't draw crowds. Routine didn't make people's shoulders tense or eyes dart nervously from badge to face. Alana stood beside the car still and composed, her hands visible at her sides. The sunlight poured over her, catching the edge of her calm like a halo. Somehow that calm unsettled everyone more than anger ever could. Across the street, Rosa held her phone high, live stream, running, voice trembling just enough for the mic to catch it. He's profiling her, she whispered. This isn't right. The word profiling rippled through the small crowd. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, keep recording. Grant leaned in close enough that only Alana could hear. His voice dropped to that low, dangerous tone that hides behind a smile. You people always think the rules don't apply to you. It was a simple line, but it landed like a punch. You could feel the weight of history in it, the quiet humiliation that wasn't just aimed at her, but at every silent onlooker who'd heard that tone before. Ethan took another step forward. Officer, that's enough. Grant's hand hovered near his holster, his words clipped. One more word, sir, and you'll join her. The street went silent. The only sound was the buzz of Rosa's phone, the faint hum of comments flashing across the live stream. Alana turned her head slightly toward him, her voice calm but razor-sharp. And you think the badge excuses cruelty? That sentence, soft, steady, cut deeper than any shout could. You could feel it move through the crowd like a wind that didn't cool but burned. Grant froze, lips parting just enough to betray his surprise. His jaw tightened, his pride scrambled for a place to stand. Around him, the balance shifted, an invisible tide turning against the uniform. Ethan murmured, "She's right." The cafe barista muttered, "Man, this ain't justice." Rosa's live stream caught everything, his face, her poise, the uncomfortable truth, hanging in the space between them. Comments rolled faster now, anger, disbelief, support. One viewer typed, "Who is she?" Another, "She's braver than most." Grant took a step closer, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "Don't test me, lady. You'll regret it." Alana didn't move, didn't blink. The silence that followed him felt heavier than his threat. Someone in the crowd exhaled. "This is wrong," a woman whispered. Ethan's hands clenched at his sides, but he didn't step forward again. No one did. The sun beat harder. The air felt thick with something electric: anger, shame, anticipation. And through it all, Alana just stood there, unbroken, her eyes steady on the man who thought humiliation could make her small. From where I stood, it was clear she wasn't fighting him. She was exposing him. And the crowd, once silent witnesses, began to feel the weight of what they were seeing. None of us knew her name yet, but something told me we were watching the start of a reckoning. You could see something shift behind her eyes, the way people go somewhere far away, just to survive the moment. And in that silence, it felt like she'd left Main Street entirely, slipped back into another decade. I don't know what she saw, but later I learned. She was 13, walking home from church with her father when the patrol car stopped. They hadn't done a thing wrong, just taken the long way through a neighborhood where they didn't belong. The officer ordered her father to his knees, right there on the curb. And he did it because arguing meant risking more than pride. The girl had cried out once, "Daddy." He only turned his head, eyes, steady voice, quiet. "Don't raise your voice, sweetheart. Raise your value." That line stayed with her. It carved itself into the bones of her life. Every promotion, every speech, every law she'd written later, it was built on that moment of restraint and dignity. He'd taught her that sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's a weapon sharper than rage. And now, decades later, under that same hot Georgia sun, she remembered. Grant was still pacing, voice raised, trying to make her speak, to make her small. "Answer the question," he barked. "Where are you coming from?" She just looked at him, unblinking. He laughed, frustrated. "What's your job, huh? You some kind of influencer or lawyer?" "Community service," she said softly. It wasn't a lie, just smaller than the truth. But the way she said it, calm, unhurried, made him frown like he'd missed a joke. He circled the car again, muttering something about entitled people. The crowd watched uneasy. Rosa zoomed in with her phone, catching every detail: the glint of sun on the badge, the sweat on his temple, the stillness of the woman who refused to flinch. Her voice slipped into the mic, trembling but sure. "That calm isn't weakness, it's strategy." And it was. Alana knew every word could be twisted, every breath recorded wrong. She'd built her entire career teaching others that restraint could expose arrogance faster than anger ever could. Ethan stood closer now, eyes filled with something like respect and guilt. He could feel the weight of the scene pressing on him. The way she carried herself reminded him of teachers, nurses, people who've been forced to earn calmness just to stay safe. Grant stopped in front of her again, frustrated that she wouldn't play the part he'd written for her. "You think silence helps you," he sneered. But she didn't move, didn't blink. Just let the question fall into the air and die on its own. The longer she stayed silent, the louder the crowd's conscience grew. A woman behind Rosa whispered, "She looks familiar." No one knew how right she was, because the truth wasn't hiding, it was simply waiting for the right moment to be seen. Impatience looks a lot like certainty until it slips. Grant slipped right then. He slammed his palm onto the hood hard enough to make the papers jump and the crowd flinch. "You think your kind can just buy respect?" The words weren't loud, but they cracked the morning clean through. Rosa's voice leaked out of her phone, a thready prayer and a shock at once. "Oh my God." The woman didn't recoil. She didn't step back or raise her hands higher. She just lifted her chin the way some people look toward a horizon no one else can see. "Respect isn't something you buy, officer," she said, steady as a metronome. "That's why you'll never have it." Silence hit us like heat coming off asphalt. A man near the mailbox turned away, suddenly fascinated by the street numbers. The barista stared at his shoes. A woman with church hair shook her head and whispered, "Lord." You could feel shame moving through the crowd, quiet, contagious, like everyone was trying to find a place to put it. Grant's face went the color of the cruiser's taillights. He stepped in close enough that you could see his pulse kick at the skin of his neck. "Get on your knees," he barked, the order flying out of him, as if the uniform had said it first, and his mouth only caught up. Ethan couldn't take it. "You can't do that," he called, voice clean and carrying. He took half a step, palms open, every line of him saying, "I'm not a threat." Grant turned and shoved him with the heel of one hand. Ethan's boot slid on grit. He stumbled and went down hard on a knee. The sound, a dull knock that made two people gasp. The woman, this calm, impossible woman, looked from Ethan to Grant, and for the first time her eyes flashed. Not fear, not anger the way you expect it. Something more human than either concern. She whispered, "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, jaw tight, pride bruised more than bone. I could hear my own breathing in the recording. The heat had a taste now, metallic and bitter. The whole street tilted towards something neither side could undo. Grant reached for her wrist. Not a question, not a request. Metal rasped. The first cuff snapped around bone with a precise little click that felt obscene in a place where people buy coffee and talk weather. Rosa's camera jerked. Her breath hitched. "This is wrong," she cried the words, tumbling into the live feed and out into 1,000 pockets at once. The second cuff closed. Her hands dropped to the small of her back fingers, still open, as if refusing to make fists even now. She didn't fight him. She didn't plead. Her face went very still, and somehow that stillness made the moment unbearable. It wasn't surrender. It was a ledger entry, something noted, balanced, saved for later. He turned her slightly, positioning her so the badge faced the crowd and her dignity faced the windshield. He must have thought posture could change the truth of what we were seeing. It didn't. It wasn't about power anymore, the thought formed in me. As sure as a sentence, I'd always known it was about who still believed in humanity. You could read that belief on faces, trembling, ashamed, stubborn like a temperature you didn't need a thermometer to know. A kid on a bike whispered, "Why is he doing that?" and nobody answered. The church sign blinked through another invitation, "All are welcome." The words felt like they'd wandered onto the wrong set. Grant scanned the crowd, daring someone else to move, to speak, to be next. He found no takers. He looked satisfied and somehow smaller. The kind of small that happens when a person confuses obedience with respect and fear with victory. He tugged lightly at her arm. "Walk," he said. She didn't. She set her feet and lifted her eyes to his sunglasses, like she could see through the tint and into whatever little room he kept his certainty in. He flinched barely. A blink he couldn't help. The only one she took from him. Rosa sniffed back tears, steadying the phone with both hands now. The chat was a flood. "Stop this. Name the town. Somebody help her." A few ugly comments snagged in the stream and sank. Most didn't. Most people watching knew exactly what they were seeing, even if they didn't have a name for the woman in cuffs. Ethan pushed himself up, one palm to his thigh, the other raised just high enough to show he'd learned the choreography of survival. "Officer," he said, quiet, almost intimate, "look at what you're doing." Grant didn't, or couldn't. A sound gathered at the edge of town, thin at first, then widening as if distance were a funnel. Another siren. It braided with the heat and the nerves until it was everywhere at once. The crowd looked toward the intersection. Blue flashed on the side windows of parked cars. Tires hissed against sun-baked asphalt. A county SUV swung in hard-nosed dipping grill, glinting like a held breath about to be released. Before it arrived, there was one more beat, the kind that makes a scene finish writing itself. The woman breathed in, slow and deliberate, like she was counting time the rest of us had lost. If she had wanted to speak, that would have been the moment. She didn't. Grant heard the siren too. You could tell by the way his shoulders lifted and then tried not to. He adjusted the line of his jaw, checked the cuffs, and positioned himself so the arriving authority would see neatness where we'd watch cruelty. The SUV rolled to a stop so close the heat from its engine kissed our shins. Doors popped open. A uniform stepped out, heavier, older, the kind of man who wears rank like a steadying hand rather than a raised fist. The county emblem caught a square of sunlight, and for a second everything shone. Badges, tears, the thin film of sweat on our foreheads, like the town itself had been pulled under a bright, unforgiving lamp. Rosa's camera found the new face. Ethan straightened. The barista took off his apron without knowing why. Even Grant's posture changed, like a student surprised to find the principal in the doorway. No one spoke. Not yet. The siren died. The echo didn't. And on that hot strip of Main Street with the governor's wrists in steel and a second cruiser's shadow stretching across our shoes, the morning reached the edge it couldn't step back from. The county SUV rolled to a stop, gravel crunching under the tires. The door opened, and out stepped a broad-shouldered man with a calm authority that silenced even the sirens. Sergeant Miller had been with the department for over 20 years, long enough to recognize trouble from a mile away. But nothing prepared him for what he was about to see. He took 3 slow steps forward, scanning the tense faces around him, the woman in cuffs, the officer standing rigid beside her. Then his eyes landed on her face, and his breath caught. The composure, the unmistakable voice of leadership, the stillness that seemed carved from dignity itself. His voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. "Good Lord." Governor Pierce Grant turned sharply, confusion slicing through his arrogance. "Governor," he repeated, as if the word itself betrayed him. His voice trembled for the first time that morning. And in that heartbeat, everything stopped. The crowd, the breeze, even the noise from Rosa's live stream. It was as though the entire street inhaled and forgot how to breathe again. Alana lifted her head, wrists bound, eyes steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You wanted the truth, officer," she said softly. "Now you have it." It was the kind of line that didn't need volume to strike. The world around her seemed to tilt. People turned toward one another, whispering in disbelief. Rosa's phone shook in her trembling hands. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice trembling into the mic. "The woman he humiliated is the governor of Georgia." Grant's color drained from his face. The badge that had shined under the sun now looked like lead against his chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stepped back once, then again, until his boots hit the curb. You could almost see the moment his authority dissolved, like ink bleeding into water. Sergeant Miller moved quickly now. "Remove the cuffs," he said quietly to Ethan, who had stepped forward, trembling with both rage and awe. Ethan's hands shook as he fumbled with the key, the metal clinking against metal, before finally giving way. The sound was small, but thunderous in the hush that followed. Alana rubbed her wrist gently, the red marks stark against her brown skin. For a moment, she didn't say a word. She simply stood there, taller somehow, not in posture but in presence. When she finally spoke, her words came slow and deliberate, each one like a verdict. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Apologize to the system that made you this way." Grant's eyes darted from her to the camera still recording. His lips trembled, but his pride held his tongue hostage. You could see the war happening behind his silence, the kind that doesn't end with words, only with shame. Ethan exhaled shakily. Rosa's live stream caught every face, the horror, the regret, the dawning, understanding that they had just witnessed something larger than an arrest. It was a reckoning. A woman in the crowd put a hand to her chest. "That's her," she whispered. "That's really her." The realization spread like ripples in a pond. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched, eyes wide, guilt settling like dust. It wasn't celebration they felt. It was conscience. Sergeant Miller took a step closer to Grant, lowering his voice so only a few nearby could hear. "You need to think long and hard about what just happened here." His tone wasn't angry. It was the weariness of a man who'd seen too many good uniforms go bad. Alana didn't look back at Grant. She faced the crowd instead, the same people who had watched in silence minutes earlier. And when her gaze met theirs, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. She adjusted her blazer, squared her shoulders, and turned toward Miller. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "please escort Officer Grant back to the precinct. There's a lot to review." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, head low. As she began to walk away, Ethan instinctively moved to shield her from the flashes of phones and the noise of disbelief now rising around them. Rosa's voice wavered through her stream, almost reverent. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just stood there and changed everything. Behind them, Grant stared at his reflection in the patrol car's window, a man wearing a badge that suddenly felt too heavy, too hollow. The crowd parted as Alana walked through the same people who had once only watched, now lowering their heads in quiet respect. No one dared to speak until she disappeared down the street, sunlight glinting off the broken line of her cuff still dangling in Miller's hand. The air hung thick, heavy with realization. Justice hadn't roared that morning, it had whispered. And as the silence settled again, one truth remained: the whole town had seen what dignity looked like when the world tried to break it. The footage didn't take long to spread. Within an hour, every local news outlet in Georgia had the clip. By nightfall, it had crossed state lines, phones lighting up across living rooms, offices, and police stations. A black woman standing silent before a white cop, handcuffed, humiliated, and then revealed as the sitting governor. It was the kind of story that didn't just make headlines, it demanded reflection. The clip opened with Rosa's trembling voice. "The woman he humiliated is the governor of Georgia." That one sentence hit harder than any speech. People replayed it again and again, each time pausing at Alana's face, calm, collected, unbroken. Some called it restraint, others called it power. By morning, reporters crowded outside the Monroe Police Department. Their mics reached through the barricades, chasing the same question: will Officer Grant be charged? Inside, the air was heavier than law books. Grant sat alone in the interview room, badge and gun already confiscated. His reflection in the one-way mirror stared back at him, pale, hollow, stripped of all the confidence that had carried him through years of unchecked authority. Across the table sat Sergeant Miller. The older man folded his hands, voice low but steady. "Do you understand what you did?" Grant didn't answer. He just stared at the table, jaw twitching. "You didn't just embarrass yourself," Miller continued. "You embarrassed every man who ever put on this uniform trying to do it right." Grant swallowed hard, but the words wouldn't come. He'd built his career on certainty, on being the one who always had control. Now he couldn't even explain himself. Meanwhile, at the state capitol, the air carried a different kind of tension. Governor Alana Pierce stood before a podium surrounded by reporters, her wrists still faintly marked from the cuffs. Behind her were flags: Georgia, the U.S., and one more, the flag of the Department of Justice. She didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. Yesterday, she began, her voice clear and unhurried. "I experienced what too many of our citizens have faced: a presumption of guilt built not on evidence but on appearance." The room went completely silent. Cameras clicked in rhythm with her pauses. "I stayed silent because I wanted the truth to reveal itself. Not through anger, but through behavior." And it did. Reporters shifted in their seats. Some lowered their eyes. Others wiped away tears they pretended were just fatigue. She continued, "I am not angry at one man. I am angry at a system that still allows prejudice to wear a badge and call itself protection. We cannot fix what we refuse to see." Outside, the crowd had grown people of all colors, holding handmade signs that read, "Respect is not a privilege and silence is strength." Rosa stood among them, live streaming again, her eyes red but proud. Inside the station, Sergeant Miller watched the governor's speech on a small TV in the corner. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then he turned to Grant and spoke almost kindly. "You should listen. She's not talking about you, but she's also not leaving you out." Grant rubbed his hands together, staring at the floor. For the first time, shame felt heavier than any punishment. That night, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse, Monroe fell unusually quiet. There were no protests, no chaos, just a deep, collective stillness. People were watching, thinking, reckoning. Rosa uploaded a new video, a quiet reflection rather than a recording of outrage. "I used to think justice had to shout," she said softly into her phone. "But yesterday it whispered and everyone still heard it." Ethan watched from home, replaying the moment he'd seen, her eyes calm, deliberate, fearless. "She didn't fight back," he murmured to his wife. "She made him fight himself." In the governor's residence, Alana sat by the window, tea cooling beside her. Her chief of staff entered holding a stack of printed comments, praise, apologies, offers to speak on national television. "Do you want to respond publicly?" she asked. Alana shook her head. "Not yet. Let them talk. Let them think." The aide hesitated. "People are calling you a hero." Alana smiled faintly, eyes still on the window. "Heroes fix problems. I just showed one." Outside the city, lights shimmered, reflecting off the marble of the Capitol building. Somewhere downtown, a billboard flashed her image beside the words "Grace under fire." But to those who were there, Rosa, Ethan, even Sergeant Miller, it wasn't grace they remembered. It was truth, the kind that didn't need defense or applause. And when people asked later why the crowd hadn't cheered when she revealed who she was, Rosa always gave the same answer: because that moment wasn't about victory, it was about realization. And realization hurts. That night, as Monroe drifted to sleep, the world outside kept watching, kept whispering her name. And for the first time in a long while, silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like justice finally learning how to speak. By nightfall, the video had crossed 1 million views. By dawn, it was everywhere. News anchors debated it, radio hosts replayed it, strangers shared it across timelines with captions like, "This is America in 2025. 4 hours after it went live, the headline blazed across national screens: "Racist cop insults governor, public outrage erupts." The clip was only 3 minutes long, but it hit like a lifetime condensed into truth. Grant's sneer, her calm, that single line, "You wanted the truth, officer, now you have it," played on loop, dissected by millions. Every second of it became a mirror people couldn't look away from. Social media exploded, a storm of fire and fury. Some called it justice in real time. Others said it was just another overreaction. The same old battle lines formed in comment sections in living rooms. But this time, the woman at the center wasn't a victim. The public could forget she was the governor of Georgia. Rosa's live stream had gone viral beyond imagination. She sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through thousands of comments. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Fire him now, that man should never wear a badge again. She's too calm, how could anyone stay that calm? That woman's silence was louder than his hate. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The same people who'd once scrolled past injustice were now fighting over it, dissecting every word, every breath. Meanwhile, the governor's office sat under a storm of microphones and flashing lights. Reporters filled the steps outside, desperate for her first statement. But inside, behind closed doors, Alana Pierce sat alone at her desk, eyes on the muted television, replaying her own humiliation. Her aide whispered, "Ma'am, the press is waiting. The nation's waiting." Alana didn't look away from the screen. When people scream, she said softly, no one listens. She turned off the TV. Silence once again was her power. For 3 days, she said nothing. No press conferências, no interviews, no emotional speeches. And yet her silence filled more airtime than any statement could. It drove pundits crazy. The country demanded words, but Alana had learned long ago words without reflection only feed the fire. Then came the leak. An internal memo surfaced. Governor Pierce had been conducting unannounced field checks on the state's Fair Stop initiative, a police reform program aimed at eliminating racial profiling during traffic stops. The revelation stunned the nation. It wasn't coincidence. She had gone out alone without escort or press to test whether the program was truly working. And the result had spoken for itself. That was the twist no one expected. The test hadn't failed. The system had. Sergeant Miller requested a private meeting the following week. He walked into her office without his hat eyes downcast. The man who had once commanded authority now carried the quiet shame of someone who'd seen too much truth. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough with sincerity, "the system failed you." She looked up from her desk, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting her lips. "No, Sergeant," she said gently. It revealed itself. He nodded, swallowing hard. "If there's anything I can do, there is," she interrupted softly. "Help me change it." Outside the window, the protests had already begun. Signs read, "Fair Stop now, and justice doesn't need a badge." But inside that quiet office, she wasn't celebrating. She was planning. Her team urged her to demand Grant's resignation, to press charges, to make an example. But Alana refused. "Firing him won't fix what made him," she said. "We need to change what trained him to see me as less." She ordered an immediate review of every department under the Fair Stop initiative. Not to punish, but to rebuild. She called for new oversight, new training, and a public hearing that would put not just one man but an entire culture under the spotlight. By the time evening fell, the nation had shifted again. The conversation had grown quieter, deeper. It wasn't just about one officer or one woman anymore. It was about what their moment revealed about everyone watching. Rosa, still sitting at home, wiped her eyes as the governor's new statement played on her screen. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was something else entirely. "I will not fight hate with humiliation," Alana said to the cameras. "We don't fix a broken system by breaking the people in it. We change it by making truth impossible to ignore." The room of reporters fell silent. And across America, screens flickered as thousands of people watched, not to argue but to understand. That night, the hashtags changed. From number fire him to number Fair Stop reform. From number racist cop to number truth revealed. She had turned humiliation into reform. And when asked later why she never struck back, Alana only said one sentence, one that people would quote for years to come. "Power isn't proven by how loud you respond, but by how quietly you rebuild." The crowd didn't cheer this time either. They just listened because for once, everyone finally did. The summons came 3 weeks later. No cameras, no press, just a white envelope on Officer Grant's desk. Inside was a single-line report to the governor's office. 90 amperes. M. He didn't sleep the night before. Every possible outcome haunted him: termination, suspension, public disgrace. He walked the marble corridor the next morning with the stiff gait of a man headed for judgment. His palms were damp. The guards outside the governor's office didn't speak. They simply opened the door and let him in. The room was quiet. Morning light filtered through tall windows, reflecting off the framed photograph of Dr. Alana Pierce shaking hands with community leaders. She stood by the desk, not behind it, hands folded, composed as ever. Grant froze. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been in cuffs. "Governor," he said, his voice small, almost breaking. She nodded toward the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Officer Grant." He obeyed, eyes on the floor. "Ma'am, before you say anything," she raised a hand gently. "You're not here to beg," she said. You're here to listen. He swallowed hard. I assume this is about my resignation. Alana studied him for a moment. If I fire you, you'll hate me, she said, her tone measured but kind. If I teach you, you might save someone. He looked up confused. Teach me. She stepped around the desk, stopping in front of him. You'll join the reverse ride program, she said. You and every officer under investigation for profiling will experience what it's like to be pulled over, questioned, and judged without cause. You'll see it from the other side. Grant's brow furrowed. You mean pretend to be civilians? No, she replied. You'll be civilians. No badge, no uniform, no authority. Just you and someone else holding the power. He exhaled somewhere between disbelief and guilt. Why give me that chance? Alana's eyes softened, but her voice didn't. Because I want you to see what I saw that day. I want you to feel how small a person can become when power forgets compassion. The words hung between them. For the first time, he didn't try to defend himself. There was no uniform left to hide behind, just a man facing what he'd done. I don't deserve your mercy, he said quietly. She shook her head. Mercy isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to rebuild instead of destroy. Narration slipped in gently like a tide turning after a storm. Mercy didn't mean forgetting, it meant rebuilding. And sometimes the hardest lesson is handed to those who least expect grace. At the edge of the room, Sergeant Miller stood silently, having witnessed the exchange. He'd come as a formality, but now he watched in awe. The look on his face said everything. He understood that this moment wasn't about punishment, it was about transformation. When the meeting ended, Grant stood unsure what to say. Thank you, ma'am, he murmured, though the words felt too small for the weight they carried. She simply nodded. Make it mean something. He turned and left the office, the echo of his boots trailing behind him down the polished hallway. As he reached the door, something caught his eye, a poster taped to the wall just outside the governor's office. It was a still frame from the viral video, the moment he'd leaned over her car, arrogance written across his face. Underneath, in bold black letters, were 4 simple words: learn, don't repeat. He stopped and stared at it for a long time. The man in the picture looked familiar, but he wasn't sure he recognized him anymore. And for the first time since that morning on Main Street, Officer Grant understood what it meant to truly stand before power and be forgiven. A month later, the headlines told a story no one could have imagined. Officer Grant completes empathy training. The article ran on every major network. The man once branded a symbol of arrogance now stood before the same cameras with trembling hands and eyes red from something deeper than shame. In Rosa's new documentary, he was the one in the driver's seat, pulled over, questioned, treated with the same cold suspicion he once carried. He didn't shout, didn't argue. He just sat there, hands shaking on the wheel, while the officer leaned in with that same detached tone he'd once used. When the stop was over, Grant broke down. Not the performative kind, the human kind. I thought I understood, he whispered to the camera. But I didn't. Not until now. The video spread quickly, but this time it wasn't anger that carried it. It was empathy. The comments beneath were different too. Maybe he finally gets it. This is what accountability should look like. Governor Alana Pierce watched the segment from her office in silence. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just nodded once, like someone who'd seen a seed finally sprout through cracked ground. At a civic forum the following week, Ethan spoke to a crowded room of teachers, pastors, and students. We all watched it happen, he said, his voice steady but heavy with memory. But she changed how we respond. She showed us that justice doesn't always shout, sometimes it teaches. Applause rose quiet and sincere, the kind that carries weight rather than noise. Later that evening, Rosa met the governor for the first time since that morning in Monroe. The younger woman's camera was off this time, no live stream, no followers. Just 2 women sitting across from each other with the quiet respect of people who had survived something together. That day taught me something, Rosa said softly. Silence can be louder than outrage. Alana smiled, not proudly, but knowingly. Then maybe, she said, we're finally listening. Rosa nodded, eyes bright. People keep saying you changed the country that day. No, Alana replied gently. The country saw itself. I just refused to look away. Outside, the city moved on, traffic lights, changing people, laughing, life continuing as if the world hadn't shifted. But it had. The Fair Stop initiative had gained momentum nationwide. Other states were adopting versions of it, calling it Pierce's Principle. And for the first time in years, public trust in local police began to climb again, slowly, cautiously, but undeniably. In a small envelope delivered to the governor's mansion, a week later, there was a handwritten letter, the handwriting uneven, hesitant. Governor Pierce, I don't know how to thank you. You made me see what I'd become and what I still could be. For the first time in 20 years wearing this badge, I finally understand what it means to protect, not just to control. You gave me something I didn't deserve, a second chance. I won't waste it. Alana read it alone in her study, the lamplight soft across her face. She didn't frame the letter, didn't announce it to the press. She folded it once, placed it in her drawer, and exhaled a quiet sigh that carried both relief and resolve. Narration eased and low and thoughtful. Change doesn't happen when the world shouts. It happens when someone listens long enough to understand the silence. Alana looked out the window toward the Capitol dome, its reflection shimmering against the evening sky. The city buzzed beyond the glass, a city still imperfect, still learning. She whispered to herself, one story at a time. And as the night deepened, it became clear the victory wasn't loud, and it didn't need to be. It lived in small, unseen places, in a changed man, a young journalist's courage, a citizen's reflection, and a leader's quiet mercy. Justice, it turned out, didn't roar. It rippled. 6 months later, the same woman once handcuffed on Main Street stood beneath the golden dome of the Georgia State Capitol. The chamber was full, legislators, reporters, citizens, all waiting for Governor Alana Pierce to speak. On the podium before her sat a new proposal, the Lens of Justice Bill, a law requiring all police traffic stops to be recorded and made publicly accessible. It was more than legislation. It was a promise. This, she began, her voice steady and clear, isn't about punishment. It's about perspective. It's about making sure the truth is no longer a matter of who has the badge or who has the camera. It's a matter of record. Flashes went off. Pens moved quickly. But her tone stayed calm, even when the room leaned in for something bigger, something personal. She took a breath and continued, 6 months ago, I stood on the side of a road, not as a governor, but as a woman mistaken for less than what she was. That moment changed me, not because of humiliation, but because of what it revealed. She paused, and you could feel the hush spread through the hall. Then softly she said, he wasn't my enemy. He was my mirror. The sentence landed like an echo finding its home. Rosa was there, camera in hand again, this time not streaming chaos but history. The way Alana spoke was different now, composed, firm, yet touched with something deeply human. Rosa focused her lens, capturing the moment. As Alana looked out over the chamber, her reflection caught in the glass behind her. The next day, Rosa's video hit the internet, another ripple, another wave. The clip wasn't sensational. It was quiet, thoughtful, and that was what made it powerful. People shared it not because it was shocking, but because it was healing. One of the reporters covering the bill spotted Ethan in the back row and asked for a statement. He adjusted his tie, choosing his words carefully. Justice didn't roar that day, he said. It whispered. And we're still listening. It became the line that defined the movement. The debate lasted 6 hours. Lawmakers argued, amended, doubted. But the tide had already shifted. No one could look at what had happened in Monroe and pretend the system was fine. The vote came at dusk. The chamber went silent as the clerk read the results. The Lens of Justice Bill passed. Applause broke out, not loud or wild, but steady, rhythmic, like the sound of a heartbeat returning after too long a silence. The gavel struck wood 3 times, echoing through the marble hall. Alana closed her eyes briefly. Not to celebrate, but to breathe. It wasn't victory, it was responsibility renewed. As she stepped down from the podium, reporters swarmed, microphones reaching toward her. Governor, what will this change? One asked. She stopped, smiled faintly. Everything if we let it. Rosa's camera caught that moment too. Later she would say it wasn't the words that moved her, it was the stillness after the way people didn't rush to fill the silence. For once, everyone simply listened. That evening, the footage played across every network. Commentators called it the quiet revolution. Headlines read, from scandal to system reform. In neighborhoods across the country, people discussed the new law, some hopeful, some doubtful, all aware. The same streets that once burned with anger now held something different: conversation, reflection, the beginning of trust. Narration faded in soft but sure wrapping around the moment like truth finally finding peace. From one street corner came a new law for the nation. From one act of prejudice came the proof that mercy could build more than anger ever could. And somewhere in her office, Governor Pierce sat by the window again, watching the city lights blink against the night sky. Each one a tiny reminder that change, no matter how small, always starts with someone choosing to see. It was late. The city had settled into that quiet hour when even the wind seemed to tread softly. Governor Alana Pierce walked along the riverside path, the skyline shimmering in the water like 1,000 tiny truths reflected back at her. The hum of traffic in the distance was faint, almost tender like a heartbeat, reminding her that the world, for all its noise, was still alive. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She answered without slowing her steps. Governor Rosa's voice came through bright and breathless. "Your speech, it's everywhere. 40 million views. People are saying you made them believe again." Alana smiled, the kind that reaches the eyes, but fades before turning into pride. "Belief is good," she said softly, watching a reflection ripple across the river. "Change is better." She slipped the phone back into her coat and stood still for a moment, listening to the river's steady whisper. Across the street, the city pulsed with light and movement, sirens, laughter, music drifting from open windows. But here by the water it was different. Here silence wasn't empty. It was earned. A car slowed nearby headlights, casting a gentle glow along the walkway. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, pale skin, work clothes, tired eyes. She hesitated, then called out, "Governor Pierce." Alana turned. Yes. The woman walked closer, holding her purse tightly as if embarrassed by her own courage. "I just wanted to say, you changed how I see people," she said quietly. "I used to think stories like yours were exaggerated. But that day, I watched, and I realized I was silent when I shouldn't have been, so thank you." For a moment, neither spoke. The night carried their silence better than words ever could. Finally, Alana nodded. "It takes strength to see yourself clearly," she said. "That's where real change begins." The woman smiled through glassy eyes, then got back into her car. The taillights faded down the road, leaving the street still again. Narration came soft, almost like memory speaking through air. That night, justice didn't roar, it simply existed. Not in headlines, not in applause, but in the quiet shift of a single human heart choosing to see differently. Alana looked out across the water. The Capitol's dome glimmered faintly in the distance, its reflection broken by the slow current. Somewhere out there, people were still arguing, still doubting, still learning. And maybe that was the point. Justice wasn't a moment. It was a motion, a choice renewed every day. She whispered to herself, her voice barely carried by the wind. Sometimes silence is the loudest sound. A train horn echoed from across the river, long and low, fading into the night like a final line in a story that had no true ending. As the narrator's voice drew near, the music softened, strings and piano fading into stillness. Sometimes the loudest roar for justice isn't a crowd or a verdict. It's a quiet woman refusing to bow. The screen of Rosa's latest video lingered on that image, the governor alone by the river, the city behind her, the water moving endlessly forward. And in that stillness, somewhere between what had been broken and what had begun to heal, the world finally listened. Every story we share reminds us that dignity doesn't always shout, it endures, it teaches, and sometimes it simply stands still. Governor Pierce's journey wasn't just about justice. It was about what happens when compassion takes the lead and silence speaks louder than anger. If this story touched you, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who believes in quiet strength and real change. And if you'd like to hear more powerful stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories. Your support means more than numbers. It gives our team the drive to keep creating stories that inspire reflection, courage, and hope. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, we believe the smallest act of understanding can echo louder than any roar.